The sun was rising over Jerusalem, casting a golden hue on the bustling streets. People hurried about their business, walking to the temple, the marketplace, or their homes. In the midst of it all, a blind man sat at the side of the road. He had been blind from birth, and for as long as he could remember, he had lived in darkness. His life had been one of silence and stillness, waiting for someone to show mercy. His hands were outstretched, hoping for a few coins to help him survive another day. He could hear the footsteps, the chatter, the movement of the crowd, but he could not see a thing. As Jesus and his disciples walked through the crowded streets, they noticed the blind man sitting by the side. The disciples, seeing the man for the first time, asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" It was a common belief that suffering was the result of sin, either the individual's or their family's sin. But Jesus turned to them with a different perspective. "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," Jesus replied. "But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." Jesus paused for a moment and then continued, "As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." With those words, Jesus began to demonstrate his divine purpose. The blind man, unaware of the conversation happening around him, could only hear the voices of the people. Jesus then bent down, spit on the ground, and made mud with his saliva. He gently smeared the mud on the blind man's eyes. The disciples watched in astonishment, unsure of what Jesus was doing. But Jesus spoke again to the man, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." The blind man, trusting in Jesus' words, stood up and began to walk, feeling his way along the street, his hands outstretched, following the sound of the crowd that had begun to gather. The crowd around him was quiet, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The blind man made his way to the pool of Siloam, the crowd parting to let him through. He knelt by the pool and washed the mud off his eyes. As the water touched his face, his vision began to clear. He opened his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he could see. The world around him was no longer a blur of shapes and shadows. It was vibrant and full of color. He could see the faces of the people who had gathered, the blue sky above, and the trees swaying in the breeze. He stood up, blinking in disbelief, realizing that he could see for the first time. The news of the miracle spread like wildfire through the town. The people who had known the blind man for years now saw him standing there with his eyes wide open, gazing at the world around him. Some of them were amazed and asked, "Is this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Others doubted, saying, "No, it only looks like him." But the man assured them, "I am the man." He was overwhelmed with gratitude and joy, realizing what Jesus had done for him. The Pharisees. Question the healed man's story. The Pharisees heard about the miracle and were angry that it had happened on the Sabbath. They didn't understand how someone could heal on such a holy day. They called the healed man in for questioning. The man explained, "The man called Jesus made mud and put it on my eyes. I washed, and now I see." But the Pharisees were divided. Some said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" They turned to the man again, asking, "What have you to say about him?" The man boldly responded, "He is a prophet." The blind man declares his faith story. The Pharisees were not satisfied with his answer and asked more questions. But the healed man, now filled with faith, replied, "Why, this is a remarkable thing. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." The Pharisees, unable to accept this, threw him out of the synagogue, but the man's faith remained strong. Later, Jesus found the man who had been healed. He asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man replied, "Who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus answered, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." The man immediately declared, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. This was not just a healing of physical sight, but of spiritual sight. The man who had once been blind now saw Jesus for who he truly was, the Savior, the Son of God. The story of the blind man reminds us that Jesus came not only to heal our physical ailments, but to restore our spiritual vision. Just as the blind man's eyes were opened, so too can our hearts be opened to the truth of who Jesus is. In the midst of life's struggles, we may feel like we are walking in darkness, but Jesus is the light of the world. Just as he healed the blind man, he can heal us, offering us new sight and new life. The man, once blind, now walked in the light. His physical eyes had been opened, but more importantly, his heart had been opened to Jesus. As he stepped into a new day, filled with sight and faith,